I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Where are our prophets now? Where are those messages God chooses to communicate divine revelation through? In the past, the Creator has sent prophets like Abraham, Siddhartha, Jesus, Muhammad, and many more. Maybe our higher power has switched tactics since we reinterpret God's words as soon as the Creator's prophets leave us. Could it be that Spirit talks to each one of us individually and we haven't learned to listen? On Words of the Prophets, our modern prophets show us how to find the internal prophet that is the I Am, and we discuss the application of spiritual principles in all aspects of our lives. Love and light, everybody. I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Today, my guests are, on my right-hand side, Rabbi Jack Schlachter. Welcome.
Thank you.
We have Betsy Miller-Kush. Welcome. And we have Belinda Edwards. Welcome.
Thank you.
They will tell you basically who they are and why they're here, so just want to go through a brief, just to introduce everybody. Today's prophetic topic is the opposite of love. And this phrase comes from a quote from political activist Eli Wiesel, and it reads as follows: the opposite of love is not hate, it is indifference. And the opposite of art is not ugliness, it is indifference. So we'll start with some brief introductions, and then we'll go right into what we're all about. But just to give you a little hint at what love really means. Rabbi, you want to go first?
Certainly. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to participate on the show today. I'm a rabbi, and I'm also a full-time physicist at Los Alamos National Laboratory. And in the course of my work at Los Alamos, I got interested in the Jewish origins of the laboratory, and so it's an interesting trade-off between the two.
It's very right brain, left brain kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Cool. Betsy.
I'm Betsy Miller-Kush. I'm an artist previously based in San Francisco for many years and relocated to New Mexico about 4 or 5 years ago, during which time I've collaborated with Belinda Edwards on numerous projects, this being one of them. I'm a painter and a muralist.
And those of you with long memories will remember Belinda. She was on the show way back when we did the show on the Red Book.
Thank you. So I'm a Santa Fe artist, and I'm currently doing a couple of collaborations, one with Betsy Miller-Kush and Harriet Sosi and Donna Coulter, and we're working on creation migration stories that came directly out of the Mining the Unconscious, project we did 2 years ago.
That was the Red Book, yeah.
Yeah,
so
the Red
people
Book.
might not remember the title. So what brings the three of you together is the Pieces New Century Project. What is that?
Well, the Pieces New Century Project has been developing for the past 14 years, and it is a collaborative art project between me and a young photographer from Hiroshima. My father worked on the Manhattan Project as a graduate student in physics, and my collaborator Masaru Tanaka's father was a young 4-year-old child who was burned by the first atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. And the two of us met in San Francisco at an artist conference 14 years ago, and decided that we needed to collaborate in an artistic way to speak about our family's experiences and our nation's experiences, and primarily the subject of peace.
Was this connection made prior to your meeting, or you just bumped into one another and talked and found this connection?
No, we were at an artist conference. He was showing slides based on his childhood in Hiroshima. I was showing slides at the conference of a piece called The Daughter of Los Alamos, which is where I was born. So immediately after that slide projection, we spoke to each other and decided that we had come together for a reason.
Let's break down the title, Pieces New Century. What are you trying to get across with that? What does those words mean to you?
Well, the project started in the in the 1990s, when we were looking forward to the millennium and to the new century coming. The title is actually chosen by the Japanese because our first exhibition was in Tokyo, our second was in Hiroshima, and it's a little bit awkward in English, I believe. But the point is that in this new 21st century, we have hopes for no more war, specifically.
Mm-hmm. And how did the two of you get involved with this project?
Well, I, like Betsy mentioned earlier, we're on a collaboration, and she was talking about this particular project, and one of the things she had mentioned was that it was going to be at Los Alamos, and we both agreed that with Los Alamos being a community that neither one of us live in, that we have to be careful how we approach Los Alamos, and that we wanted to go actually to the community looking at a wholeness, a whole program. We wanted to go in peace. We wanted to have a program that was inclusive. And so basically we spent a year working on that. And since I don't know the community, I talked to Jack Slachter about the community, and he was also involved in kind of helping us develop the program.
And from my perspective, I think promoting peace is fully consistent with Jewish values, and Belinda, with whom I work as a colleague at Los Alamos National Laboratory, suggested that maybe this might be a project I would be interested in helping support, and I was very honored, I think, to be part of the ceremony opening the exhibit.
So the labs don't have a problem with the two of you being involved?
So I'm certainly not representing the laboratory in my involvement in this project, but there's no conflict with the laboratory in that sense.
Okay. I mean, the reason I'm asking the question, is
well,
we have a paranoid government.
Well, I think one of the...
And to be at peace, being for peace and work in the labs is contradictory.
Well, that was one of the important statements that came out of our very first get-together, where we talked about the thing that was most important to my father, having worked on the original atomic project, the deterrent value. And when we were meeting, we were in the midst of the crisis in North Korea and in Iraq, and we felt that it was important to honor the work done at the lab as well as the peace. We wanted to make sure there was no conflict in this at all, that it was not seen as a protest, that it was not seen as a statement, anti-nuclear statement particularly. And this was a little bit touchy to handle. I went in and worked with students in the Los Alamos High School, and believe me, I had to jump through some hoops in order to be able to make a presentation to the class.
So you've had this presentation. This took place on the anniversary of the dropping of the bomb.
Yes.
We have some pictures coming up of these origami cranes, and they were a major part of it. But let's talk about this celebration of peace.
It was incredible. To me, it was just an inspired day. We had presenters from numerous religious backgrounds who spoke, who chanted, who said prayers or made some sort of a statement. We had children from the high school speak, who I believe were some of the most eloquent speakers of all. We had cello music from a dear friend who is a Santa Fe musician. We had
Singing Bowls, which was by Jay Agu. In addition, we had Jack that was also did the 6 directions from the Hebrew perspective. It was just really powerful, and we had people in the audience that was from Sinai Pueblo that was there to also support us. So it was just like an array of people from the community. And not most important, but we also have to say that Masaru, who's the Japanese artist, and his family was there from Japan, during the ceremony, which made it really special.
He was accompanied by his wife, his mother, his elementary school teacher, who it turned out had been a survivor of Hiroshima, his little boy, who was 4 years old, the age his father was, and just as rambunctious, and a filmmaker from Canada, another Japanese friend who served as the translator. So we had a really powerful group of people. This was held at the Fuller Lodge Art Center, and the Fuller Lodge being the gathering place for the scientists in 1945. It was really very important that we bring the new century into the presence of the old one.
I thought it was a very powerful statement to hold the ceremony in Fuller Lodge. I agree, this being a building that predated the Manhattan Project. But I would actually come back to something you said politely, that I think when the laboratory was founded in 1943, and this being the 70th anniversary, it was especially appropriate to have this exhibition held this year. When the laboratory was founded, I think the people at the laboratory were hoping to bring peace to the world. The world was at war, and I don't think it's inconsistent that what was being done at Los Alamos, though it had horrible, destructive consequences, I don't think it's inconsistent with the idea that people wanted peace in the world.
They just had a crazy definition of it. I mean,
well,
I shouldn't use those words, but I mean, I was going to ask you even before you said that, how many people were in Hiroshima? How many survived?
Well, I have to say, this is not the topic of this exhibition. The facts and figures of who lost more people on which side, how many lives would have been saved, how many lives would have been lost, much of that's conjecture. At that point in 1945, when that bomb was dropped, it was a political decision by President Truman, and I have copies of two documents, one from my mother, one from my father. The scientists at the lab almost universally signed a document asking that they have some input into the use of this terrible weapon. It was ignored, of course. The decision was made in Washington. The paper that I have from my mother is an address to the women of Los Alamos saying we must guard against this being misused in the future. We have to remember it was developed for use against, it was in a race with Nazi Germany. Japan was not even really in the picture at that point. So to get into the question of how many lives, balancing the two sides of a war in which none of us participated at a different time in history, I think is not the point of this exhibition. The point is to look forward, and the point for Masaru Tanaka and me as artists is to make these images together which allow people to speak about wartime experiences and about their own hopes for the future.
So let's get back to the cranes. What do they represent? I mean, you have one right here on the table.
Sure.
Linda?
The cranes are an international symbol of peace, and it's twofold. This was gorgeous, by the way. It's twofold. There's a Japanese, and I don't know if it's myth, but it's a Japanese story that the cranes lived for 1,000 years, and that basically with these cranes, that if you make 1,000 cranes, that basically it'll bring you good luck. And oftentimes Japanese fathers will give their daughters cranes, 1,000 cranes, for the wedding. Our cranes can also be given to children.
And these the people on the screen are the people who made the cranes?
We had 700 cranes, and these are the two women. Aiko in the middle is the one that actually recruited her two friends to make 700 cranes, and they actually sent them from Charleston, South Carolina, to us. And what's amazing is they did this in less than 2 weeks. It was like a week and a half. And it also speaks to the power of this particular exhibit and ceremony, because they heard about this from Jamie Seaver and Jay Agu, who were the musicians, and basically Aiko got really excited and she decided she was going to make the peace cranes. Also, Aiko is from Japan, and she knows the power of the cranes, and so she sent those to us.
There was a flyer you folks had given me, had two statements on it, which both of them I loved. I write peace on your wings and you will fly all over the world. And that ties back in. Here's another picture of, is that all 700 of them?
No, that's not all 700. We had them almost all over the exhibit.
Okay.
It was incredible to see the number of cranes that they made. But I think it was Sadako, who was a young Japanese girl that was 2 years old when the bomb was dropped. And basically, at 12, 10 years later, she developed leukemia, and she heard about the stories of the crane, and so she started making 1,000 cranes. And unfortunately, she died before she had made the 1,000 cranes. She died at 644 cranes. And so her classmates were inspired and actually started making the cranes. And also there is an exhibit, not an exhibit, but a statue of her in Japan. So this picked up even more significance at that time.
So that second quote is from her classmates. This is our cry, this is our prayer, peace in the world.
Yes.
So each one of you has a story to tell as it relates to non-peace, I guess is one way to put it. Betsy, you want to start?
Well, the background that I've given you already on my father's wartime work is one part of it. My father was a student at the University of Chicago. He was a graduate student in physics coming from the University of Notre Dame, and he was sent to New Mexico. He never spoke much about the work that he did. There was great silence there, and the counterpart of the family in Japan, Masaru's father, also never spoke about his experience, because the survivors of the bombing carried such shame in the culture that they didn't want to be even known or acknowledged. So he didn't speak about it until he was an adult, and actually when he met me was during our project was sort of when he opened up and became a spokesperson for the hibakushu, they're called, who are the survivors, and most of them have very terrible stories to tell.
We've been flashing some of your images on the screen. Can you explain them?
I'll be very happy to. The process is that Masaru sends me a photograph. He's for the most part, a nature photographer. And in this case, the photograph was of water with the lanterns floating on it, in the memorial lanterns that are cast upon the water every August 6th. And so I painted in this piece a hand holding the crane that we've just talked about, the peace crane. They're collaged together on the computer and then printed. So the prints can be any size, really. We've shown some very large ones and some smaller ones. The process was revolutionary back in the time when we started it. Now you can do it, I'm sure, much more simply. But it's two images collaged together, and the result belongs to both of us. We do not exhibit them without the other's permission. And so this particular one, this one was done right after 9/11. Masaru had traveled to New York during that time period, and he sent me the photograph of the skyline with the Statue of Liberty. My own work features a large Earth Guardian figure, whom the Japanese have nicknamed the Protector. I think of it more as an all-around earth spirit who's just sort of out of range of our sight, and this spirit is not somebody I see except when I'm painting. So in this image, the earth guardian is holding the globe, the earth, within the sort of the shadow of the Statue of Liberty. And the message, of course, is right after 9/11, how important it was for us to be working toward peace. This one is, his photograph is a lotus, very large-sized lotus figure, and it's difficult to see on the screen, but there the Earth Guardian figure is to your right, mostly in blues and reds, and she has two small hieroglyphics there, which are from the Aztec mythology, which simply say flower. So this would be the flower of peace.
The Earth Guardian, is this a mythological creature, or is this something that you created?
Well, I created her, and I've tried to research who she might actually be. She participates in all the major female beings or deities in the religions of the world, but I don't think of her as a specific one. She doesn't have a name.
Okay.
She's just someone. She shows up in my paintings. I let her stay.
Okay. And so then we have a couple more here.
Okay,
yes?
this one was the only one that we have done simultaneously. The lotuses here are in his photograph in the Hiroshima Peace Park, and it's difficult again to see the Earth Guardian figure, but she's to the left and is sort of gold wrapped around one of the blossoms. And this piece has a title which is called Clear Rain. We titled it that because during the course of this, he was painting, he was doing his photographs, I was painting. Children were coming through the Peace Park. It began to rain, and afterwards we reminisced about the fact that this was clear rain rather than the black rain that had fallen in that exact spot after the bomb was dropped.
And I think we have one more on this. Yes.
This was the first one that we did. He sent me a photo of a beautiful cloud-filled sky, and my Earth Guardian figure there is reaching up into the sky with a smaller human figure sort of crisscrossing the larger figure. When I sent this back to him and they were put on the computer, he said, well, you realize, don't you, that this forms the Chinese ideograph for human being. So, of course, I didn't realize that. I was doing it intuitively, but this has been a very popular image for that reason, because it reaches across visual boundaries to speak to people.
Beautiful. Rabbi, you started mentioning earlier about history of Judaism and how it ties in. Could you flesh that out a bit?
Sure. Let me just pick up on what Betsy said. I think the idea of an Earth Guardian is, at least from my view, part of Jewish tradition, and you're looking at the Earth Guardians. I think that's our role. So if I go back and think about the beginnings of the laboratory in 1943, when I came into one piece of the laboratory 3 years ago, the theoretical division, I started to do a little research on that organization. It's one of the 4 divisions that were formed at the very beginning of the laboratory in 1943, and theoretical division is the only division that has an uninterrupted 70-year history. So because it was such an important division, I decided to look into its origins, and I was overwhelmed by the number of Jews that were in leadership positions in theoretical division in the 1940s. Because of my Jewish background, I started to look into this, and many of these individuals were refugees from Europe, and their fates would have been quite different had they not come to the United States. I believe they worked on something they felt passionate about because their co-religionists were being wiped out in Europe. Of course, 6 million Jews died during the Holocaust. I think the scientists at the laboratory, many of them Jewish, understood that what they were doing was trying to bring peace to the world. I'll just share with you also my own personal situation. My father enlisted after a few years in college and went to the European theater in 1944, late 1944, after D-Day. And he was on leave in the United States, waiting to be shipped out to the Pacific Theater at the time the bombs were dropped in Japan. And he felt, and it's hard to say obviously whether this is true or not, but he felt that his life was saved because the war came to an end. So I always felt some connection through his service to the country.
And are we also taking in, I mean, from, again, the Jewish perspective, you know, several millennia of non-peace?
So I think Jews, perhaps more than many other peoples, understand what the importance of peace is because of not living in necessarily peaceful environments. You know, it's very appropriate that you quoted Elie Wiesel, a Holocaust survivor, in your opening remarks. I think Jews understand the importance of peace. It's a ubiquitous word in our teachings, despite the fact that we don't always live in a world of peace.
Yes. You just remind me, I wanted to ask you, Betsy, just a quick question. You talked about a peace park. There was a gentleman, I think he's just recently passed. His name was Sri Chinmoy. And he's got peace parks all over the world. Was the Hiroshima Peace Park from
this is a civic park. It is where it's ground zero and the confluence of two rivers, and where the atomic bomb was dropped in 1945 was turned into a peace park. So it has flowing water through the park. It has many statues. It has contributions from many nations. It has an unbearable museum to go through with artifacts from that day. It's quite a large park because Ground Zero was quite a large place, and it is absolutely incredibly peaceful to be there. You just cannot imagine the circumstances that brought this into being. And I think it's the character of the Japanese people who have made it so. It's a playground for children. There are homeless guys wandering through. It's like it's a cross section of the human race in that park, and so that's where we did the composite piece that I talked about. And Hiroshima itself, because people always ask and want to know this, that we have this image of the city as ashes and gray ruined buildings, and it is a bustling, lively, very prosperous city. It's all been rebuilt since the war in the 1950s. So it's full of young people, it's full of life, it's very, very vibrant. And the people there have a very special feeling of a very special challenge toward the awareness of peace in the world, because they're the residents and the survivors of that action.
Linda, you have a story you wanted to share as well.
Well, I want to set the context for my story. The war started in the 40s, early 40s. During that time in the United States, we had, as far as African Americans, most of the country, and especially in the South, was under Jim Crow, laws, and so that you had African Americans that had facilities that were separate but equal. So you went to separate schools, you had separate restaurants, the housing was in different areas. And so when African Americans during the World War II were inducted into the armed forces, one of the questions was, do we go and fight, against fascism in Europe, and yet we don't have, we're second-class citizens here. And one of the things that, as I look back on it, if you look in the black community is always willing to go to war for this country and has gone to war for this country. My father was in the war. Basically, he did a lot of cleanup detail. One of the things I called my brother yesterday to see if I could get some more stories about, his war experience, and then we realized that my dad didn't speak a lot about the war. But the things that he did say was like he had some of the worst details, while he was in Europe. And he was also in high school and was taken out of high school he was drafted to fight in the war. So, but what's amazing, even with the conditions that were in the United States, even with the conditions that were in the Army, because the Army was segregated at that time, my father, I believe, came out of the war with a stronger thirst for freedom and also a curiosity about other countries that he passed on to his children.
And this is your father in the picture we're flashing on the screen?
Yes, that's my dad. That's Leroy Francis, yes. That's my dad.
And we've got, a crane or two alongside. Can you explain the altar a little bit?
I'm going to leave that to Betsy. Can you explain
the altar was built as a sort of a Day of the Dead altar, which is our tradition here in New Mexico. And we had water and earth from 4 locations. This one that you're looking at is the Hiroshima side of the altar. We had a Los Alamos side, we had a Nagasaki, and we had Pearl Harbor. And Masaru and I have, as we've traveled to those various places, brought back a little water and a little earth. So we had those 4 containers to bring the spirit of the earth in a very concrete way into that altar. Then we asked people to bring a small object representing their family or their experience to place on the altar. We had numerous small photos and objects, and the folded cranes were there. We also had, flying above the altar, a contribution from the children in Japan right now who sent little airplanes. I don't have one with me. They're little hand-folded airplanes resembling B-52s and each one had a little tiny crane folded into it. So these were, this was the reverse, bringing peace here from Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Fukushima, because there was a point of acknowledging too the importance of that the lab played in helping to control the Fukushima disaster after the tsunami, and the cooperation that has developed between our countries in the.
Could you elaborate on that, either one of you, a little bit more?
On which the
tsunami and the role the lab played?
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with it other than in passing, but maybe Jack.
So I'm certainly aware of some work that Los Alamos National Laboratory has done in support of the disaster at Fukushima, some of it having to do with modeling of the reactor systems, because people have very elaborate computer models at Los Alamos trying to figure out what actually happened to better understand what might be appropriate steps to take to mitigate problems.
And they worked hand in hand with the Japanese.
So I think at the time of Fukushima, everybody was trying to help.
Yeah.
So, I think Los Alamos was one of several organizations trying to provide assistance.
Before I started doing television, I did radio. I had 10 years on the local public radio station. Same title show for most of the time, same thrust of the show. I used to do what I called specials. And the question was, Why does it take disasters to bring us together? So I did a special back when we had the Los Alamos fire, did a special on the Columbine shootings, did a special on the Plaza shootings during Fiesta, and then wound up doing one on 9/11. You know, so I'll throw that out to you. We're talking about peace. Why do we need disasters to learn how to work together?
What a huge question.
I wouldn't ask if I didn't think you were up for it.
Belinda?
Oh, thank you, Betsy.
Pass the buck.
As an artist, the disaster touches you deeply emotionally, and so you have to. You're not a legislator or a policymaker or even an activist necessarily. So and those disasters that you're talking about have featured into some of the artworks indirectly. It's from my side, but the question of the human condition and what it takes for us to understand that we are all relatives. We're all part of the human race. We don't need these terrible differences between us. This is a little of the context of the other project that Belinda and I are working on.
And I also want to say if the context, there was very much the context of the ceremony and the exhibit too, because we had people that were at the ceremony that their families were affected by the war, you know, whether it was their fathers, their uncles, or their mothers, that they were affected by the war, but we all came together, you know, and actually, you know, asking for world peace. And I think when you come together, when there is, well, this was, but still it has an effect on our consciousness. When you come together and you see that everybody is affected, it brings some compassion and more humanity into the circle. And hopefully we can think deeper and feel deeper so that if we as individuals at a decision point about how to respond to something, that we remember.
Yeah. Put the burden on you, Rabbi.
I knew that was coming.
You talk about, you say you identified as a theoretical physicist.
I'm part of that organization. I'm actually experimentalist by training, but yes.
Okay, I don't know
Right,
the distinction between
right.
the two of them.
Not so important.
Yeah. The question, you know, what both Betsy and Belinda both kind of said was we're all one. Physics is taking us in that area, quantum physics and particle physics and string theory and all that kind of stuff. How do you see your discipline, so to speak, bringing another voice to this conversation?
Well, one thing I can say is that physics tries to understand the natural world around us, and a culture that has the value system that supports research on understanding the world around us is a culture that has the potential to appreciate that we are part of one world. So in some sense, you know, not everybody supports the idea of doing physics research because what's the payoff, you know? So we learn more about some subatomic particle. How does that actually help the world? Directly, probably not, but indirectly, it's the idea that by exploring how the world works, we're reminded that we have one world here and we're part of it, and it's our responsibility to guard it in your beautiful guardian image.
I mean, again, you have the perfect set of disciplines for me to ask this question. You're a rabbi, you're a physicist. Are we not, as we go deeper into physicists, that's probably not the right word, but you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Are we not really basically learning more about how the divine works in this world, in our lives, that we're all one?
So I can again only speak on behalf of myself. I think
Of
there
course.
are many physicists who will have their own personal views on this, but for me, I think the beauty of the world is becomes even more apparent as one does research on the physical world, and that beauty seems like it can't just be happenstance and coincidence, and that there does seem to be some underlying unity to it, if you will, which we can give the name God or some other association. But to me, I think some of that beauty comes out in exploring the world, and it strengthens my belief, I will say that.
So let's take all of this now and start looking at where we are today and where we'd like to go, and not necessarily specifically, but do you see science, physics as a major player in the unification of this race that seems so intent on destroying itself?
I think
That's
it
my
has.
commentary,
I think
by
it
the
has.
way.
I think science has the potential to contribute in substantive ways to an improvement of the world. I don't know that that's always been the case. I also think that sometimes scientists, I don't know if shirk their responsibility is the right way to say it, but scientists don't necessarily embrace the responsibility they have to share in layman's terms what it is that science does. And so we sometimes end up in our society with a divide between scientists and non-scientists that isn't necessarily healthy for anybody.
Yes, any divide is not healthy. Thank you for that. So, what do we learn from the past? I mean, you folks are doing wonderful work. You're bringing out something that not only has been brought out, but needs to continue to be brought out. You know, and what do we learn from the past? Anybody?
Well, I'm going to just say really quick, what I learned during the ceremony was really incredibly powerful. And what I learned is that the intention is really important, and it's important to play with people that have the same intention, that can create an environment where miracles can happen. You know, and it was amazing to see so many people come together with one intention, which was peace, and also being inclusive of everyone that was involved. That really created a shift in me, and hopefully it created a shift in other people that came. And I actually had a chance to feel peace and calmness that I don't normally feel, and it's usually intellectual. I felt this in my body. You know, I felt centered, peaceful, and it was all as a result of that ceremony and the exhibit too. Yes.
Well, if you go back to your original quotes, that the opposite of love was
not hate, it's indifference.
It's indifference, and we made a dent in the indifference that day. And I believe, you know, just from knowing as much as I know of my collaborators here, that there's a great overlap happening as well between science and art, between psychology and science and art, and the raisingness of the famous raising of consciousness that was sort of started back in the 70s, and it's all just small little movements, but I felt like somehow that day, and with this exhibit, we pierced through some of that indifference and got to a point where people were not only looking at beautiful images, but they were hearing beautiful voices, they were hearing chants, they were hearing speeches, they were hearing these 15-year-olds speak about the hope for the future. So the hope for the future is really with them, but we have to provide the ground for that to blossom and to happen.
I think we have a handful of pictures of the ceremony. Should be coming up on the screen. We can talk about them because I just want the people to see a little bit of the ceremony. Now, those are your photographs, your drawings,
yes,
I should
these
say.
are the images, the collaborative images.
I'll just mention that the Jewish calendar is different from the calendar we're used to using, obviously, in this country. And the timing was amazing, that the ceremony came right at the beginning of a new month on the Jewish calendar, and it's the month that's a period of retrospection. And so for me, I thought the ceremony was a wonderful way to look inside and to see, am I doing the best I can do to help bring peace to the world?
How do we continue to transmit this? Let's talk about this image. That's some more of the cranes, and there's a hanging crane, I believe.
That's one of the hanging
And
planes
is that one of
that
your pictures too, Betsy?
That's the one that we talked about earlier that was done in the Peace Park.
Okay.
The clear rain image. And you can see probably at least 100 cranes stacked in front of it there. And then the suspended image is the airplane with the Peace Crane in it. This was in a little alcove at the Fuller Art Lodge.
And
this is Jaya Gu's singing bowls. She was one of the musicians that was there. Jamie Sieber was the musician, and they are actually magicians also, that was playing. But this is kind of before the ceremony started. And it was beautiful. I think really the music really helped to strengthen the container for the ceremony and to actually move people into a space that I don't think just talking can do.
okay, and I think there's an altar.
Yeah, this is a section of the altar. You can see the form in the middle is the container for the earth, and it's a little bit hard to tell, but there's a little water container positioned in the vase that holds the water and the earth. This was the one, the water and earth from Los Alamos, from Ashley Pond, and from outside the Fuller Lodge is where the earth came from.
And I think we have.
And that's Jaya Gu, the person that was playing the singing bowls. And in the background, actually, that's the photographer that is Fuller. I forget his first name. Ken Fuller, that took the photographs for the ceremony. Yeah. Ken Grady.
And the ceremony ended with a circle outside the Fuller Lodge with the youth, the high school kids in the middle of the circle facing inward, and then the adults on the outside. This is our musician, Jamie Sieber. And at the very end, the students were asked to turn around, and they each faced an adult and were given sort of a charge of carrying forward the effects of the ceremony.
Who developed the ceremony? Was
All
it
of
collaborative?
us. Absolutely, yes.
That's
yes,
beautiful.
we worked with the Fuller Lodge staff, Ken Niebuhr and Amy Biarke, and with our committee here, with the teachers at the Los Alamos High School, Mary Grace in particular, who's the head art teacher, and numerous community members. It was a collaboration of the highest order.
What happened to all of the pieces? What happened to the
They are awaiting their next showing. I have them in my studio right now, and they will. There's talk of taking the exhibition to Geneva next, to the UN headquarters there. It had been the last show was at the UN headquarters in New York, and then it came to Los Alamos. So it may move on, may move to another location in New Mexico. I would like that, if more people could see it before it travels. And then it may go back to Japan again.
It would seem like it should have a permanent place.
Oh, wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, I mean, really.
There are close to 70 pieces in the exhibit, and we exhibited about a third of them. So it's it would need to be a sizable museum to handle it.
Well, the lab's got plenty of space. And I think that would be a very appropriate place for it.
Well, that's an idea. We'll be discussing that after the show, I'm sure.
We're starting to run down on time. We only have a handful of minutes left. Any of you have any announcements you want to make?
I just wanted to make the announcement that Jamie Sieber and Jay Agu will be playing at the Ukaipa Zen Center on September the 22nd, and it starts at 7 p.m., and that's a Sunday night. And in addition, that this is the first time Jamie has actually done a concert here in Santa Fe since moving to Santa Fe. So it should be something.
And is Jamie the woman we saw in the picture with the cello?
Yes, Jamie plays the electric cello, and Jay Agu is the one that plays the singing bowls. And they provided the music for the ceremony.
And I have to say that music set the entire tone. It's a sort of haunting sound, almost like a cry, and almost like a cry of joy at the same time. A very, very evocative sound to set the tone for the. And then Reverend Jax, Rabbi Jax. He has a beautiful voice as well, and he was one of the Buddhist nun from the Hemas Zen art Manda. What is it? The Manda.
The mandala?
Zen, no, it's the Zen Manda Center in Hemas Springs. The
right.
Bodhi. She also chanted, and so we had these two fantastic voices with this sound of the cello, and I don't think there was a dry eye in the house by the time it finished.
And is there a CD of all this?
Well, Jamie has a current CD out that's called Timeless, and she'll be playing entries for that. We don't, at this point, we don't have a CD of the music for the ceremony.
Okay, we're going to be cutting off here shortly, so the piece we're going to be hearing is the invitation.
And on her new CD called Timeless, yes.
But the invitation was from the ceremony.
The invitation is not from the ceremony. It's on her CD.
Okay.
And it's the first piece on the CD.
So
we didn't have any music from the ceremony.
Okay. We've got 2 minutes. Parting thoughts, any of you?
We have a piece of origami paper. We thought you could show us how you can fold a crane for the viewers.
I said 2 minutes, 2 days.
I want to say how much I appreciate your having us on the show, and how honored I was to be part of the ceremony and to help promote peace from the perspective that I come from. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
And thank you for your incisive questions too. This was not just a light conversation on the subject. I feel as if we plunged into some territory that needed to be explored.
Thank you. Well, I don't know if I said it on air or off, and I forget the things. But we need to sustain the species. There's a reason we're here, and without harmony, without peace, we've just blown it.
Yeah.
And I wanted to say thank you again, and I'm going to ask you if you'll read your quote that you brought us into the show with, so that we can remember as we leave.
The quote is, "The opposite of love is not hate, it is indifference. The opposite of art is not ugliness, it is indifference." And I'll end with one other quote. Sri Chinmoy has a beautiful quote. I'm going to butcher it, but to give you the basic gist of it, which is, peace is not the absence of war. Peace is the presence of respect, love, harmony, and I forget something else, but and that was always, when first time I heard that, it just resonated with me, because we cannot set a direction by negation. We have to have an affirmation. What direction are we pointing in? It's not we just don't want war. Where does that leave us? It's what we want, peace. And what does that really mean? What this quote says, what Sri Chinmoy's quote says, and what you people are all here telling us about. I thank you all. Blessings to you all. Thank you for tuning in. And we're going to end with a 4-minute song called The Invitation. You'll see the artist flashing along with the music. Thank you. See you next week. Blessings. I'm Reverend Phil, and I've been your host for Words of the Prophets. Thank you for tuning in. Please join me again next week, same time, same channel, for more Words of the Prophets.